All right, welcome to the first of its kind, world-changing manufacturers network. Lisa Ryan has her ears to the ground and her heart in the game. Get ongoing education and new connections right here with Lisa and the Manufacturers Network. Buckle your seat, listen, and spread the word. Here's Lisa.
Hey, it's Lisa Ryan. Welcome to the Manufacturers Network podcast. I'm excited to introduce our guest today, Jason Vanzin. Jason is the founder and CEO of Right Hand Technology Group, one of the top managed service providers in the world, which focuses on cybersecurity and compliance, particularly for manufacturers. So, Jason, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So share with us a little bit about your background and what led you to doing what you do with Right Hand Technology Group.
Sure. It's like Steve Jobs says, when you look backwards, you can connect the dots. Going back to pushing lawnmowers makes me realize what got me in the business ultimately. But as far as IT, very young age, in my teens, I bought my first computer and just liked it. Decided I want to get in a computer, so I went straight to 2-year school, started working, then went back for my bachelor's degree in information systems management. Started studying cybersecurity. This was late 90s. Started studying cybersecurity. Started off my career in the kind of the corporate America. At UPS was my first job, then Computer Associates and Nortel Networks. And then as you remember, the early 2000s, the dot-com bubble burst. So they were laying off 10, 20,000 people at a time. So I ended up getting a job with a little IT company doing small businesses. And I just really loved it. Loved that, working directly with everybody in the business and supporting them. And every client I worked with had great relationships, grew the accounts. So eventually I decided to go off on my own. A lot of those companies ultimately followed and then just kept growing and growing. And then, actually right before COVID, which worked out really well, we shifted towards the cybersecurity. I am a certified cybersecurity professional, and we shifted more towards driving cybersecurity programs for companies. Often they hire IT people, they get a certain size, and then they hire IT people directly. But they trying to grow a cybersecurity team is out of the realm of possibility. We come in and run those cybersecurity programs for them, working directly with their IT team. I always like to say, if you look at an enterprise, they have an IT department, and then they have a cybersecurity department. They're separate. They both have some conflicting goals and aims, so you want a little attention there. And then we're able to bring that to small, medium-sized manufacturers, obviously, without building whole departments and all that. So,
Right, interesting. So it's a simple question, but what's the difference? What does the security department do that the IT department doesn't do, and vice versa?
Yeah, so it's probably a dangerous confusion that a lot of business owners and people in general think if you're a technology person, you can solve everything, right? Like anything has to do with electronics must be the IT guy. But IT people are usually fixing things, fixing your computer, getting you working. It's about productivity, about fixing your problems. Cybersecurity is about minimizing your risk, which sometimes can conflict with productivity, right? Like if you got to do MFA, all of a sudden that's one extra step you got to go through to get logged into a system. So there's this kind of give and take between IT and cybersecurity. So cybersecurity might say we have to fix this vulnerability we found on the system. And then typically IT is the one that does it because they do it and they gotta have change control and they do it in kind of a planned manner. But cybersecurity understands what that vulnerability could mean, what risk that could mean, and where an IT guy might not understand the risk. It's more about risk management.
Yeah, and we hear so much about cybersecurity today. What do you feel are some of the most significant cybersecurity challenges that manufacturers face?
I think we're on the right track already. I think the misunderstanding of cybersecurity at the executive level is a huge problem. Also, it's the assumption that IT is taking care of it. IT people are great people. They love to fix your problems. And what they don't like to do is tell you no, or that I can't fix that, or I don't know. Like they're usually yes people. So they're not going to tell you that, no, I don't understand that cybersecurity. And they might understand some of it, but cybersecurity now is so, it's, I don't want to say it's so complicated because it can be simplified, but you have to approach it holistically. You can't just put in antivirus and think you're good. You can't just put in a spam filter and think you're good. There's supply chains to worry about. There's natural disasters, as we see this past couple of weeks, to worry about. There's foreign actors to worry about. There's so much to worry about that you need to approach it through a systematic framework. And there's frameworks out there that allow you to do that through, like the NIST, the National Institute of Standards puts out the NIST cybersecurity framework. The DoD is pushing out CMMC, which is really, I think, the playbook that everybody should follow. It's forcing the whole supply chain to meet this standard, be third-party validated, and that's how you know your supply chain is secure, right? Everybody's reaching the standard. A little bit like ISO. If you want quality control, you want to make sure people are ISO certified on their processes.
So it would seem to me that if this information is readily available through NIST and these other sources, that the cyber criminals are probably also having access to the same thing. So it seems like it's just a game of continually outsmarting the bad guys.
Yeah, it's definitely a cat and mouse game. And let's go back to, was it George Bush who said they only got to be right once, we got to be right every time. So the same thing with cybersecurity, right? Like we got to be right all the time. They only got to be right once. But the frameworks, again, allow you to think through it systematically and assess your risk and address those risks. And also from the management perspective, like I was mentioning, management often just abdicates this to the IT department, but management is the one that has to accept risk and decide on risk, how it should be addressed. So these frameworks, they're really just making you walk through your risk and make decisions on them and set policies on them and put policies and procedures in place. But even if the bad guys have them, it's not like a schematic that they can just look at the schematic and figure out how to get around it. Now, that's what vulnerabilities are, like in software and stuff. They're figuring out how to get past the software, and that's why you hear about vulnerabilities constantly, and patching is such a big deal, and minimizing your footprint is such a big deal, because that's what they're doing. And then obviously social engineering is what they're doing as well. So the human side is always the weakest side.
Yeah. So what are some of the steps that manufacturers should take to protect their supply chain, for example, from cyber threats?
Yeah, so I would say the first step is identifying what is your supply chain. The first module in this cybersecurity framework is identify. So if you're talking about your supply chain, you want to identify what is your actual supply chain, what are your inputs, what are your outputs, the people that supply you, like what functions are dependent on them, and then once you like what your risk is with those, so you can go to the ones that are most critical and say, hey, what are your cybersecurity standards? And again, ISO has 27001. So if it's an international thing, do you meet ISO 27001 cybersecurity standards? SOC 2 compliance has been a big standard for a long time. And then obviously CMMC coming down at the beginning of the year here is going to be coming in the DoD supply chain. So making sure they have those and they're certified by a third party would be critical. But ultimately, you need to identify who has access to your data, and then you can, from there, if you're just buying paper towels from some company, that's part of your supply chain, but maybe it's not as critical as somebody who's processing your payroll.
See, the cyber criminals are getting better, and their emails are looking more and more realistic. I just shake my head every time I hear one of my friends either tell me about something they fell for or their parents fell for, clicking on those links. So how are you, if a manufacturing employee gets an urgent email from the CEO, quote unquote, to wire him some cash, what are some of the ways that you can make absolutely sure that people are clicking on the right things or not clicking on the wrong things?
Yeah, that's security. They always say security is in layers. So there's layers to that. Even obviously, you want to have spam filtering and filtering that kind of looks for impersonation attempts, so that if somebody's impersonating the CEO, it picks up on it. There's email configuration things like, I guess I don't want to throw around acronyms that much, but there's something called DMARC and DKIM that kind of tell email servers how to handle these kind of emails that come across that are posing as that's coming from your company. You can put the banners. I'm sure you've seen the banners on emails. Hey, why is the CEO?
Yeah.
Yeah, why is the CEO emailing from external source? But sometimes that gets overboard and people just ignore it because they just see it so much they don't even think about it. But as far as you're saying the wiring, you got to get back to somewhat of process and procedures, right? So if he emails and says, I need you to urgently wire this, there should be two people that have to authorize wires. There should be a process of, hey, I never just take an email. I got to call and validate the approved phone number. So not just the number they put in the email, that you have a list of phone numbers. The other one we've seen is someone posing from the bank and then saying, I need to validate you. Can you give me your PIN? And then you give them your PIN. And then now they have access to your account. Same thing, right? Okay, I'll just call you back, validate that you are who you say you are, and hang up. Then you should have a approved list of bank numbers that you call back and verify it's really them. So
Hmm.
it's manual, and technological.
Yeah. What about smaller manufacturers? How can they implement effective cybersecurity measures without breaking the bank?
Yeah, I guess sound a little selfish, but that's where companies like mine come in. Because obviously you don't have to hire a full-time resource. And then we have different options. And I'm sure we're not the only ones. I wish we were, but we're not the only ones out there doing this. But we have things like coaching. So again, maybe you have a really good IT guy. He is sharp, but he just needs someone that can coach him through doing those risk assessments, implementing those frameworks. And then we have the ability to do a whole program and run the cybersecurity for you. So it's there's options, and then you could do it yourself if you have the skill and the knowledge. Which again, with IT people, it's like different skills, right? When you're talking about frameworks and planning and processes and procedures, that's like a different skill set than the guy that can fix all your IT problems that loves playing with computers, right? Those are different skill sets, but that's probably the least of cost, the least expensive way to do it is to outsource it. But I guess the thing is doing nothing is not really a great option because I always like to tell people it's not like they're targeting you because I hear this all the time. They're not targeting us, they're going after the big guys. Have you ever gone fishing? Yeah, you're always wanting to get the big fish. You're always throwing in your rod hoping you get the big one, but you catch a little bluegill, you're still happy. You still caught a fish, you still pulled it out of the water. It's the same thing with when you talk about phishing emails. They're sending them out. They don't care if you're a 1-2 man shop or you're a bank. So they're just throwing out these emails by the millions and hoping somebody bites on them.
Mm. Now, we talked a little bit about training, but are there other things that the roles that training plays when it comes to employees, other things that they can do besides teaching them to really look for that this email was sent by an external source, or maybe sending them some fake phishing emails to see who clicks on it and further the education? What other kind of training do you recommend?
Yeah, the biggest problem I see is not enough training. There's never like everyone, not that it's wrong, but everyone says they're too busy. But everyone is busy. But you have to keep it top of mind. If you don't keep it top of mind, then that's when you're going to fall for it. So you need to have more frequent trainings, whether that's shorter, monthly, weekly trainings. You need those tests need to be a lot more frequent. One of the pushbacks we get when we're working with clients is we're already getting so many spam messages. I don't want you sending out a test every week or every month. Let's do it quarterly or let's do it once a year. That's just not that's not a good test, right? So if you're already getting hundreds of spams, our one test a week isn't going to overwhelm your mailbox, but it's going to give us good data to know who needs to have more training and who's most susceptible to these phishing emails. And then there's also, again, we were talking about the banking stuff. So the other thing is, especially with AI coming and it getting so advanced with audio, is over the phone. So it's called vishing. So you can do the similar type of test, but over the phone. So make sure people aren't falling for people posing from the bank or posing from a client or or the CEO. I'm sure you've seen there was a South Korean company that gave up $25 million because there was a deep fake of the CEO in a meeting.
Wow.
And so I think maybe sharing some of those, people seem fascinated by these stories too. So maybe sharing these stories so that, hey, this stuff could happen to you. Maybe I know a lot of manufacturers will have an internal company newsletter, making sure that these are part of that.
Yeah, I heard one that you also want to be careful of responding to a question with yes, because then they have your voice saying yes that they can use for all kinds of things. So it's so scary that you don't really trust anybody these days for
Yeah.
anything, and even watching what you say.
Yeah. And I guess you and I right now, we're going to be on the internet. So we're
Yeah,
doubly susceptible.
exactly.
Yeah.
So then, of course, we have Industry 4.0 and the technologies that go along with that. So how has that impacted the approach to cybersecurity and manufacturing?
Yeah. It's just adding to the amount of things that you have to monitor, maintain, keep track of, because all of those, they're all network connected. They all need kept up to date. They all have vulnerabilities. A lot of the breaches that take place are through vulnerabilities, unpatched vulnerabilities. Again, I guess I live in this world, so sometimes I feel like everyone knows these things, but there's been a lot of breaches lately with VPNs
Mm,
because these are appliances that are sitting on the internet that people VPN into and they're not patched. And then as soon as it gets released that there's a vulnerability, well, the bad guys are immediately scanning the internet looking for those firewalls or VPN appliances. There's actually a search engine where you can go and just type in Avanti VPN and it'll show you where all the VPNs in the world basically are. It's like the Google for internet connected devices. And it's publicly accessible. Everybody has access to it. It's called Shodan. So that, as you can imagine, as you put more and more of these internet connected devices, that's more and more potential entry points that need to be maintained and again thought through. Like, how are we connecting this, and what kind of risk does it bring into the environment? How can we isolate it? Maybe minimize that risk. Obviously, they create value too, right? So you got to balance
right.
that out.
Yeah, there's just so much to it. I know every time I'm speaking at a conference and I'm following the cybersecurity guy, I know I'm dealing with an audience who's just afraid. So,
Yeah.
so what are, when a breach does happen, what are some of the best practices for responding to a breach?
Before we started this, we talked about being prepared. Like
Yeah,
preparation is key, making sure you got an incident response plan that you follow, that you actually test. So doing either tabletop exercises. I'm sure you've heard of pen tests where you basically got ethical hackers that'll try and hack your environment, seeing how you stack, seeing how you pick up on that stuff when it's happening. Maybe you don't notify the whole team and see how they react to it. But when there's an actual breach, your incident, basically get your incident response team together, follow your plan, involve your cyber insurance company, because if you involve them too late, it could cause bigger problems. For example, one of the first things they're going to do is bring in legal counsel. Legal counsel creates that attorney-client privilege, make sure that information is controlled. If you wait too long, then everything before that is obviously up in the air as far as whether you could be forced to release it. Follow your plan and follow your cyber insurance and what the attorney tells you is the key.
you use the term ethical hacker. What is that?
That's the good guys that help you, that see if they can hack you in order to point out where your vulnerabilities are.
Okay. It reminds me of a story, and this is my cousin is in his 40s now, but when he was 12, he actually hacked into the FBI.
Oh, wow.
And
Jeez.
and then he called them and he said, I just hacked into you. You should hire me so I can help you fix your vulnerability. So my uncle and aunt had the FBI knocking at their door about their 12-year-old genius kid.
Wow.
So I think ethical hacker, I guess that would be along those lines, but yeah, still
Yeah. Yeah. Typically they're being asked to do it, but yeah.
but then you have really smart 12-year-olds out there.
Yeah, I don't know if Kevin Mitnick is, but he was like one of the most famous hackers in like the 80s and 90s. Went to jail, had all of his electronics taken off of him. The movie Hackers was made about him. And
Okay.
then he was actually, I don't know if he was one of the founders, but of Know Before. I'm sure, I don't know if you've heard of Know Before. It's like one of the biggest end user security training companies in the world. I think it's probably the biggest. But he was like, he did all their training videos. He's a turnaround story of doing what he's doing bad. And he was doing it, at least according to movies, he was doing it just to see what he could do. It wasn't like he was stealing stuff or anything like that. He just wanted to, it was like a challenge, like a puzzle for him.
Right. Yeah, it's so interesting. Of course, we have AI that has just exploded on the scenes. And we talked a little bit about that, about deep fakes and using the AI voices and stuff. In what other ways have you seen AI play into cybersecurity and manufacturing?
Yeah, it's obviously the big thing. And everything That's the yin and yang. So this stuff is super powerful for productivity and improving business. Obviously, it's with the bad guys. That is their business. So like for them, it's improving their productivity and their effectiveness on their side. So yeah, obviously the emails, but when you think about tying automation to that and then all the data that's publicly available on social networks and stuff, and you tie the ability to pull that data and then take that data and write those emails and write those, again, if we use audio, or you get to the point where it's video, they already have the video, but if you get the way they can really systematize it and automate that, it's going to be because it's going to be speaking to you and what you know, like the stuff that's out on the social networks and congratulating you on whatever, your kid's baseball game or whatever. Like it's going to sound like they know you or they know your company. So that's the big thing. And then, but again, on the good side, all this stuff creates opportunities for people to create solutions to them. So people are going to be creating technologies that obviously teachers have tools to see if AI was used to write reports. So there'll be tools to figure out, like, is this a deep fake? Is this audio real? Is this email real? So that stuff will also be incorporated into the security tools that we use to mitigate those risks. So that's again the flip side, but it is a cat and mouse because the bad guys figure something out and then the good guys got to figure out how to counteract it and then back and forth, right? You're typically not the good guys typically aren't figuring out a solution for a problem that doesn't exist yet.
Well, and I think it's becoming more and more acceptable to respond to send a new email to somebody using the address that you have saying, did you send me this? Because it's like, I don't click on anything. It's valid or not, unless it's a direct response from me, because you never know. So I think as we become more and more aware and continuing to have the conversation and continuing to do the training, but to be okay of just like, hey, I'm being extra cautious right now. Did this come from you? Making that phone call? Because there's a lot of new technologies that are out there and they just keep coming. So as we're starting to wrap up, is there anything that I should have asked you and didn't ask you specifically about cybersecurity and manufacturing that you feel is important for us to know?
Not other than the compliance side that I mentioned a little bit with CMMC. Obviously, a lot of manufacturers, even if they're not necessarily making weapons or tanks or something, are making some part that goes into one of those things, and they could be ultimately umbrellaed under CMMC compliance. And then I do think once the DoD has some success with this, it's going to replicate throughout a lot of other areas. So compliance is going to drive the executives out of the stick your head in the ground and hope it doesn't happen to us, because it's going to force them to, if they want to do business, they're going to have to do it. So I would say compliance is a big thing that's coming down if you want to get ahead of it. And also you could use a competitive advantage as other people are looking at their supply chain and they reach out to you or a competitor, and you have high cybersecurity standards, maybe ISO 27001, and the other company doesn't. You might have an advantage. I think compliance is going to get bigger and bigger. Unfortunately, cybersecurity gets worse and worse.
Right, exactly. Amazing. So if somebody did want to get in touch and either, have a conversation with you or learn a little bit more about how you can support them, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, probably our website, which is righthandtechnologygroup.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn, Jason Vanzin. I think if you just put Jason Vanzin at the end of LinkedIn.com, it'll find me. That's probably the quickest, best ways.
All right.
I don't have a Instagram or any of that fancy stuff.
All right. Jason, it was a pleasure having you on the show today. Thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Lisa. Have a good one.
I'm Lisa Ryan, and this is the Manufacturers Network Podcast. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to the Manufacturers Network Podcast. Do me a favor and share this podcast with your friends and colleagues so we can grow this network and connect more fantastic folks just like you. You can either send your buddies to the website at manufacturers-network.com or share the Manufacturers Network podcast on your LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or wherever you and your industry friends hang out. The bigger and faster we grow the network, the stronger and deeper the community will all have. Thanks again, and I appreciate you.